Post-Trauma is a third-person psychological horror game where you play as Roman, who awakens in a train station, alone, confused, and can't seem to find his way out. The game is available on Steam, PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series consoles. Atmosphere. There's a strange loneliness and deep emptiness to the cold corridors of hospitals and subway stations, places of waiting that Roman wanders endlessly through. And there's the feeling that you're walking through an afterlife, that you're somewhere decidedly not real, no matter how it presents itself. At its worst, it's a nightmare, and at its best, it's some form of stagnant dream. As mundane as the environments appear, there's always something wrong with them. Strange flesh grows over surfaces, and rows of lockers can contort into a tunnel. There's a lot of unnatural and captivating things that seem to serve no purpose at all adorning the walls, but signify how, wherever you are, it's definitely somewhere far from the real world. The game's fixed camera angles go a long way to painting the environments as the foreboding and surreal places they are. The environments loop over and over, and the atmosphere, to begin with, can be stifling. But walking backwards and forwards through the halls and rooms to solve puzzles can get a little tedious, and this really is where the game starts to fall apart, since there's very little to sustain the atmosphere while you're wandering around trying to solve puzzles. The first-person sections tend to lose the edge entirely, with the atmosphere fading away as soon as you start puzzle solving in an office-like environment. It doesn't have the same visual style of a single character standing against a lonely corridor, and feels a little dull in comparison. They aren't huge parts of the game, but they're enough to make those sections noticeably different. The atmosphere had the potential to be great, and some of the time it accomplishes what it's trying to achieve whilst wearing its inspirations on its sleeve. It can feel decidedly cold and dead, but it has too little to keep it going, and switching to first person wasn't the solution either. That's no Harry Masons. Scares. There's lots of eerie things in post-trauma, from crying figures in toilet stalls that cause immediate hesitation to approach, to the game's oddly designed enemies. But as for jump scares and scripted events, the game doesn't use them to do much more than a brief startling moment that's quickly forgotten. What ends up standing out the most is the game's combat, which is emphasized heavily with the screen effects and pulsing music to make it seem more intense, but the combat itself is pretty clunky with preset animations, meaning that you're locked into your swinging motion and can't change direction once you've started. But this works for the enemies too, meaning that you can just abuse their animation windows and constantly hit them in the back, which was the dominant strategy for the game, since weapon ammo seemed scarce. This made nearly every fight and boss encounter feel less impactful than the game had probably intended, and turned combat into a bit of an annoyance rather than a frightening ordeal. This, on top of how little combat the game actually had, leads to the game containing barely any frightening moments. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The game is engulfed in a deep reverb, whispery ambient plays like ghosts in the distance, making the already spacious, dark environments feel even more cold and empty. And behind that is the game's soundtrack, with its murky, eerie tones, a shuddering, sad melody of weeping instruments, deconstructed and laid bare, the sound of dark thoughts in your mind barely perceptible against the emptiness. Though it also has a lot more Silent Hill-inspired pieces with rock-like tracks to give melancholic and emotional twinges to some scenes. The game's sound effects are all very clean and tight, but things like the door opening sound effects tend to repeat a great deal with no variation to them, and considering the number of doors, it gets a little grating after long periods of play. One of the more impressive things the game does is playing random sound effects off in the distance, like someone in another room is smashing glass and causing a ruckus, but following the sound to their source reveals nothing. The weapon sounds for melee weapons are pretty satisfying, along with the blast and following deafness provided by the shotgun. The pistol doesn't quite match up to the other weapons, but ammo is scarce anyway. The game's voice acting is a bit of a mixed bag, with Roman's accent being pretty thick and his pronunciation makes him sometimes hard to decipher. Freya uses a text-to-speech voice on her phone, which leaves a few other characters with decent but unremarkable performances.
Jill? It was Jill, right?
It was. I used to be Jill. Now I'm something less. And you. You're still you.
Jill, please. I need help. Something's wrong with me.
There is, but it's not enough.
I don't understand. Why are you hungry?
Don't you dare.
The sound space and directional audio are impressively implemented to aid the sound effects that play in the distance. Overall, besides some repeating effects and questionable voice acting, the sound design is very solid. That's one Harry Mason. Gore. There's some satisfying blood splatters when you attack enemies and some fairly bloody scenes and environments throughout the game. It's never excessive nor lacking and feels appropriate for what seems to be going on in the game. That's two Harry Masons. Story. The game's story follows train conductor Roman as he tries to escape the nightmare that he finds himself in. From my time playing post-trauma, it felt like the game's story was near indecipherable, and all I had during the game was the basic understanding that guilt had played some part in the events transpiring, and various characters were wrapped up in it too. What led to this was basically a lack of storytelling. The game didn't try to convey much of anything concrete to give the player an anchor to latch onto. The cutscenes that take place feature characters that talk to Roman who seem to know far more about what's going on than the player or Roman do combined, but they talk in riddles and never elaborate. And Roman himself spends most of the game confused by the events as well. Other characters don't know anything either, and there's a lot of symbolism for certain things, obviously, but it's difficult to really tell what any of it means. There's no notes or diary entries, and the environmental storytelling isn't clear in what it's trying to say. When it comes to changing characters to the first-person section, this felt more focused, but it still wasn't really clear why any of the events were happening, and it felt like it was desperately trying its hardest to keep that a secret. The game's ending ended up revealing certain things, but it was again pretty difficult to feel anything for it, even with the good ending, since the journey that led up to it felt nonsensical. There could have been so many different ways the game could have been less vague about what the story There could have been so many different ways the game could have been less vague about its story and what things meant, and even if the choice was to leave it up to the player, there really needed to be more to hold on to. Making the final score 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. Post-Trauma was pretty underwhelming. It didn't feel very unique, with very obvious references to Silent Hill in both appearance and in the audio department. The gameplay didn't really appeal to me and the story didn't get through to me at all. It wasn't a bad game, but it definitely missed far more times than it hit in my opinion. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I escaped the nightmare, I didn't feel bad and advise you don't either. There will be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.